Chemotherapy-induced hair loss is really a difficult situation for people globally. And it's often said to be the most traumatic side effect associated with cancer and cancer treatment. And it's yet maybe one of the side effects that is the least explored. Paxman, the next company to present here, has been pioneering scalp cooling therapy technology over the past quarter of a century. And with us here we have the CEO, Richard Paxman. Please give him a warm hand.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As I've been kindly introduced, Richard Paxman. I'm the CEO of our company, Paxman Scalp Cooling. Great to be here today and nice to be in person after 2 years of sitting and doing this in front of Zoom. So here to talk a little bit about hair loss and chemotherapy-induced alopecia, as well as chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy, which is also such an unmet need. Most of us have been touched by cancer at some point in our lives. In fact, there's about 18 million new cancer cases every single year. Many millions of those patients will have chemotherapy, and unfortunately, many millions of those will lose their hair. So we at Paxman have developed a technology that actually prevents or reduces that difficult side effect, which is still considered a real unmet need. So hair loss and what that means to a patient. So if you look at the statistics, it's actually one of the most feared side effects of the treatment itself. It can lead to social isolation, so patients may not continue to work. They may stop doing social activities with their family and their loved ones. It also is considered the most traumatic side effect, and we think that's because it's so visible to the patient themselves, but also their loved ones. Related to that, it's also considered more difficult than breast surgery for a large number of patients. So this is really about being able to protect a patient's privacy and also keep a little bit of normalcy. You'll even find a certain patient population will say no to chemotherapy because of hair loss. So this is not only about the emotional well-being of a patient, but it can actually affect outcomes as well. So why we do what we do? We've been doing this, as the lady kindly said, about 25 years. When I was just 10 years old, my mum was diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer. She was in her 30s, beautiful curly hair, and she didn't want to be that cancer patient. She was actually offered something called cold caps or scalp cooling all those years ago, but unfortunately for my mum, it didn't work. And that was the first time she was really affected by her poor prognosis. It affected us as young children, and it also affected her relationship with my father. Seeing that distress, my dad started to look at, well, why didn't it work, and what can we do to help patients in the future? So as a family, we've spent the last 20 years developing the technology, improving the technology, carrying out large-scale clinical trials around the world, and more recently, and more as importantly, really supporting market access for patients. We lost my mum 20 years ago, so this is something that we're very, very passionate about. It really is our vision that no matter where in the world you are, no matter what your income, your ethnicity, your gender, what your treatment regimen is, you should have access to scalp cooling and really help with this difficult unmet need. So how it works, it's quite simple, thankfully. I'm definitely not a scientist, but what we're doing is we're cooling the scalp to around 20 degrees Celsius, a little bit lower. And what happens at those lower temperatures is we induce vasoconstriction, so restrict the amount of blood flow and chemotherapy to the hair follicle, so reduce drug perfusion. We'll also see a drop in metabolic rate. That reduced metabolism means reduced cell division, therefore less targeted effect by that chemo. And that's really important when you sort of microtubule taxane types of chemotherapy. And then more recently in the cell culture models we've developed, we're actually seeing less drug diffuse through the cell membrane, both actively and passively. So in effect, protecting the hair follicles from that chemotherapy treatment. So we deliver that cooling by two quite simple devices, a single model and a double model. They're compact refrigeration systems that pump a liquid coolant around a soft, either single patient use cooling cap for a consumable different model market, or a reusable cooling cap. And again, that gives us that flexibility depending on the type of healthcare system. So the patient wears the cooling cap 30 minutes before chemo, so during the antiemetics, throughout the alopecia-causing chemotherapy, and then for about 90 minutes after. It's a very simple device to use. It's been implemented in many parts of the world, and we work very closely not only with physicians and medical leaders, but oncology nursing teams as well. I'm very proud to say we've got an awful lot of clinical data for a medical device company. That's not always that common. In fact, we've got about 8,000 study subjects looking at our data set and looking at our patients. On average, we see that 50 to 60% of our patients are successful, not requiring a wig or a head cover. So you do see some hair loss. What we also see in the clinical data is that we have improved hair regrowth, so another driver for patients to ask about scalp cooling and start scalp cooling, as well as a reduction in the idea of persistent or permanent chemotherapy-induced alopecia, something very important to patients. This has all been carried out in different parts of the world, large randomized control trials, prospective studies, retrospective studies, and also real-world evidence as well, which is becoming more and more important with patient-reported outcomes. So we have a public company. We're listed on the First North Nasdaq, and we did this in 2017 with a view to enter the US market and raise some capital. We have our operational company, which is Paxman Coolers Limited, which controls the manufacturing side of our business and also distributes globally. And then we have Paxman US Inc., which was formed in 2017 to satisfy our US market. We've got a strong board of both Swedish and English people with a variety of different experiences. Some of you may know Per-Anders Johansson, who is our chairman. We've got a large and growing team, although still a small company. We're about 70 people now. Big increases in people and real investment over the last 5 years in enhancing our senior leadership team and really focusing on that sort of regulatory, international, and now our US business as well, which is becoming more and more critical. So in terms of where we are today, we've got about 4,500 of these systems installed globally in about 60 markets. If you look at the UK as a prime example of what we can achieve, about 99% of the National Health Service, which is a public health system, use our equipment, as does the private sector. So I think that's testimony to what we can actually do across the rest of the world. We operate in a number of different models, traditionally distribution models with medical device distributors. This has been an effective way to enter new markets, but not as good in terms of growth of the business. It's very much about capital equipment sales to the distributor and then on to the end user. What we started to do as we've developed is become more creative with our business models, going direct in markets like the US, Canada, licensing models with pharmaceutical companies like Teva in Mexico and hopefully other parts of Latin America. And then models where we have a mixture of capital equipment and consumable single patient use cooling caps. The US has been a main focus for us. How our infrastructure works in the US is that we install the equipment free of charge usually into the healthcare systems. What happens then is the physician will prescribe scalp cooling to the patient. And at the moment, it's a self-pay model, and that's what we're working on changing. The patient pays for a number of treatments and their cooling cap, so we get that recurring revenue stream. To date, we have about 950 systems installed in about 400 locations, including Memorial Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, Dana-Farber, Mass General, and then large community centers as well, including US Oncology. So really starting to gain traction in that market and treated 9,000 patients as of the end of the year. But as you can imagine, that's just scratching at the surface. In terms of our revenue, year on year, we've seen some impressive growth from 2017 to 19 at about 300%. Unfortunately, COVID did affect us. We saw a little bit of a slowdown in the US, but still saw some growth. But our rest of world markets did falter a little based on the distribution models that we have. Back to 2021, though, back on that growth trajectory and very confident based on our strong order book at the start of the year, and that trend is continuing throughout. You'll see Q4 2021 there was our record month with some really, really strong sales, and hopefully we can keep that momentum. In terms of sales mix, we're now starting to see the US company really take over in terms of sales levels, and that's that recurring revenue stream that we were talking about, and that for me is the most interesting story for our business. This is just looking very briefly at the US. So you see that consistent growth, that slowdown in 2020, but back to decent growth levels in 2021 with 40% growth, which I think is a strong signaler to how important this treatment is across the globe. Another statistic, just looking at our average daily treatment revenue, because this is a consumable model, it's a pay-per-patient model, we expect that continued trend in terms of strong daily revenue growth. And then looking at that return on investment. So it obviously is quite capital intensive. Each machine costs about 83,000 SEK. It takes about 6 patients to get our payback on that machine, so not too high. So we've invested about 56 million SEK in equipment into the US market to date. Revenues of about 143 million SEK, and about 258% return on investment. Now that kit, that capital equipment is still so underutilized, so we're really working on getting those numbers to increase, and we're very confident we will do with the changes in reimbursement. Just looking at our investments and debt, so we raised about 30 million SEK in 2017 when we went public. We then took on some additional debt to invest into the business and invest in that capital equipment I've just talked about. And then more recently, we've carried out a couple of directed issues, really based on enhanced institutional interest in our business and the potential opportunity. And a lot of that is about reimbursement in the US. So we decided to do 2 directed issues, reduce our debt, but also start really focusing on the growth of the business. And I'll talk about a few areas that we're looking at very shortly. You'll see that continued amount of investment that we've made. That's very much into the capital equipment in the US, but also in areas such as reimbursement and research and development, which is very key to us. I won't go into this, it's a very busy slide. What I want you to see is that we've got progressive increases in revenue. Our cost structures, though, of course, are increasing. We are very focused on being a high-growth company and also a profitable company, but at the moment we're still making those investments and key investments into reimbursement, etc. So the opportunity, as I said, the market is huge, 18 million new cancer cases globally. Just looking at the US alone, up to 400,000 patients every year that could potentially benefit from scalp cooling. So at least a $600 million addressable market in the US alone. So to take full advantage of that potential market, this is when we did the directed issues, one earlier in 2021, and then subsequently in 2020, late 2021, following some very positive news about the reimbursement landscape in the US. So our focus has very much been about internationalization, so looking at new markets, placing key strategic people in high growth markets, such as Canada, the US, as we'd already talked about, here in Sweden, where we really needed a presence and don't have much as yet. Also France and Germany, 2 key markets for us, as well as India. We're also in the process of, and just signed an agreement with a large Chinese company to start looking at developing the market over there. So the reimbursement side of things has been very key for us. That has potential to take this business somewhere else. We've worked on the NCCN guidelines, so it's now a category 2A for recommending scalp cooling for patients with different types of solid tumor cancers. We've got CPT codes, so we need to be able to pay for scalp cooling. The payers need those codes to do that, so we worked with the AMA. And then more recently, we learned from CMS, after a lot of work with them, which is the public payer in the US, that they will now start paying $1,850 per patient for one of our codes. This is a huge breakthrough for the company and a strong signal that scalp cooling will be universally paid for in the future. To do that, we must change our business model. As I said before, the process is very much, as of today, about self-pay. So we're changing to a new business model where we're actually selling the cooling caps directly to McKesson Specialty Care Distribution, one of the largest distributors in the world, and they will in turn sell those to the providers. The providers will then go through our enrollment process, and we've now set up the infrastructure to allow us to do benefits investigations for patients, prior authorizations, and also appeals processes. So this all sounds reasonably simple, but this is an impressive infrastructure that we've set up to really take advantage of this new reimbursement story. We'll also have a patient assistance program running in the background as well, which is important to me to make this equitable. So research and development, still very critical for our business. So we have research and development looking at scalp cooling. So the future of scalp cooling, so cooling caps, the best possible fit, the best possible efficacy, but also important to that, we're developing something which is topical. So we've developed a compound which is now being tested at the moment in a formula to get into the scalp. And hopefully we believe that will enhance efficacy, but also provide us some flexibility in our approach for further consumable revenues. Now I'm slightly running out of time, so I won't rush too much in this bit, but chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy. This is such an unmet need. What we're seeing is that actually cryocompression can have a benefit to reduce this unmet need. Now, for me, this is potentially even more exciting than scalp cooling. We have a relationship with the National University of Singapore, and we've developed a alpha prototype, which is now in test in Singapore with cancer patients, and we're just finalizing our beta prototype. We will be launching clinical trials with a large cooperative group early next year in about 30 centers, 400 patients, looking at this unmet need, really to prove that it's efficacious. Again, a huge opportunity to make a huge difference to so many patients. And then last but not least, our Scalp Cooling Summit. I urge any of you to come and look at our on-demand content. We got 50 speakers last week from around the world talking about this unmet need. So really impressive with about 1,300 delegates. So I think really placing us as the leaders and thought leaders in this space. So thank you very much, and pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Richard. How about competitors? There has been scalp cooling devices around for quite a while, as you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation.
Absolutely, yeah. So in fact, our main competitor, and I would say it's our only real competitor at this moment in time, is Dignitana. So they are a Swedish company. They're also on the First North Nasdaq. I think both of us complement one another. We are delivering the same type of technology, but there are obviously benefits to both. But I believe the space will become a little bit more crowded, but based on hopefully what I presented you today, we're staying ahead of the curve and already have built some fantastic relationships and have that strong clinical data behind us, as well as regulatory approvals, which is a timely thing to undertake.
Cancer patients also get chemotherapy at home, in the pouches and the duct ports that the medicine gets into. How about that process of hair loss when you're treated at home?
So in the UK, where we actually provide IV chemotherapy on a regular basis at home, we actually offer a service of scalp cooling at home. In different parts of the world, that's not always as clear. And then the different types of chemo don't always cause hair loss. So if it's an oral chemotherapy, it perhaps wouldn't, maybe hair thinning. So not always appropriate for the home setting, unfortunately, but maybe in the future.
And the neuropathy, of course, I mean, I'm sure most people here have friends that have undergone cancer treatment and lost sensation in their feet and hands, and it's a terrible condition. So this is extremely exciting. And how about competitors in that field? Are you...
Yeah, so again, yeah, huge opportunity. There is one company who are have developed a cooling device, but unfortunately there's no large-scale clinical trials proving its efficacy, and it's not involving the compression side of things as well, which we believe actually adds some value as well. But actually what we need to do as medical device manufacturers is prove this through randomized controlled trials, and no one's done that yet, so we will lead the way in doing that in America.
Well, best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.